Hi everyone, I'm Jamie Batts, your instructor for Bio 109, and this is the last chapter of the semester. We are diving into chapter 19, which is all about development and inheritance. And we're going to zoom through it, and I may have to pause the video. I have to go pick my daughter up from school. So if I don't get finished, which is possible, then I'll have to pause the video and just start back up later. So it might be divided into two sections. Here you see your learning outcomes, which are already included in your chapter guide in your weekly folder on Blackboard. There is an overview of development that occurs in this chapter. There's development, which is the gradual modification of anatomical structures, physiological characteristics. This goes from fertilization onto maturity. And then there's prenatal development. This is before birth. And there's postnatal development, which is after birth. There's the prenatal development is your embryological development. So this is the events that occur in the first 2 months after fertilization, so for about 8 weeks. The study of these events is called embryology. Fetal development begins at the 9th week and continues until birth. So embryological development is from that little ball of cells to about 8 weeks, and fetal development is 9 weeks to birth. So this is a fetus at 16 weeks. Gestation is the time spent in that prenatal development phase. It's divided into 3 trimesters. If you've ever been pregnant, you know about these already. The first trimester is when all major organ systems appear. This is the first 12 weeks. The second trimester is the development of all the organ systems, and the third trimester is when the organ systems become functional. So, again, those 3 trimesters, and this is basically the same thing that was on that last slide. This is confusing me. The first trimester is when all the organs appear. The second trimester is when body shape and proportions will start to change. And then the third trimester is when the fetus will gain lots of weight. And you probably will too. At least I did. So postnatal development is from birth to maturity. The maturity is the state of full development and growth. Basic understanding of prenatal and postnatal development is very important. It provides insight into all anatomical structures. Mechanisms for development and growth are similar to repair mechanisms that we've talked about. So let's start at day 0. This is the day of fertilization. This is the fusion of the 2 haploid gametes. Enzymes released by multiple sperm cells create a gap in the follicular cells, and a single sperm can penetrate that oocyte. The sperm and egg each have 23 chromosomes. They fuse. It creates a zygote. The zygote now has 46 chromosomes. The zygote will divide. It's a process called cleavage. This group now forms blastomeres, and it's created by this cleavage process. It's called a pre-embryo. Cleavage lasts about 7 days as this pre-embryo travels down the uterine tube to the uterus. So again, fertilization happens in the uterine tube. Fertilization happens, egg and sperm come together, and then they slowly divide, and now you get this little ball of cells called a pre-embryo entering the uterus after about a week after it has been fertilized. So day 1 is a 2-cell stage. This is when the blastomeres, which are daughter cells, they're very big, each half the size of the zygote. Then we get a 4-cell stage, 2 more daughter cells. Then we get an early morula, is what it's called. Now it's a solid ball of cells. Then the advanced morula is the ball of cells that reaches the uterus. Day 5, that zona pellucida is shed, and the morula, which is this little ball of cells, which will grow into a baby, goes into the uterus. Typically, at this point, the girl doesn't even know she's pregnant yet. So, first cleavage, second cleavage, or first division, these blastomeres, 4 blastomeres, then we call it a morula, and then an advanced morula, and that morula sheds that, sheds that zona pellucida as it enters the uterus. So, now day 6, we're called a blastocyst. The blastomeres hollow out and form a hollow ball. The inner cavity is called a blastocele. The rate of growth increases. The blastomeres are no longer all identical. The outer layer is called the trophoblast, and then you have an inner cell mass which will form the embryo. Then implantation occurs around day 7. The blastocyst attaches to the endometrium. It erodes the endometrial lining, kind of is enclosed by the endometrium by day 10. So it nestles into the endometrium, forms like a little cave in the wall of the uterus. The trophoblast continues to develop rapidly. It's called the syncytial trophoblast. The cells near the endometrial wall lose their plasma membranes and create a layer of cytoplasm with lots of nuclei. Then the amniotic cavity starts to form around day 9. Finger-like villi extend away from the trophoblast into the endometrium, creating little channels called lacuna. These fill with maternal blood. The fetus doesn't have any blood at this point. It's just a ball of cells. Inner cell mass separates from the trophoblast and creates this little fluid-filled amniotic cavity. So here you see what I mean. Blastocyst comes in, forms a blastocele, attaches. The syncytial trophoblasts start projecting in, and the lacuna start to embed themselves, and the amniotic cavity has formed within this trophoblast structure. And here you see this orange layer of cells. That's the inner cell mass. So you can pause the video here, go back and review. Day 9 is, again, that inner cell mass is arranged in 2 layers, a superficial and deep layer. Cells from the superficial layer will migrate to the amniotic cavity. This is the first step in forming the amnion, or an extra-embryonic membrane. Then the yolk sac forms by about day 10. This is where cells deep in that inner layer migrate to the outer edge of the blastocele and form a yolk sac. The yolk sac is our primary nutrient source for this inner cell mass for the next 2 weeks. After day 12, gastrulation will occur. Gastrulation is when the germ layers or embryonic layers are formed. The ectoderm has the superficial cells that didn't migrate anywhere. The endoderm has the cells facing the yolk sac, and the mesoderm has the migrating cells between the endoderm and ectoderm. The end result is a 3-layered sheet called an embryonic disc. So here you have this last picture that I showed you with the deep layer, superficial layer, this inner cell mass, right? Our amniotic fluid or amniotic cavity, the blastocele. Then a yolk sac forms. Notice that this entire structure is embedded in the uterine wall at this point. You have these trophoblasts extending out. This is what's going to form the placenta. The yolk sac, this is nourishing all of these cells. The cells do not have their own capillaries associated with them yet. This yolk sac is the primary source of nutrients, fills lots of protein. Then gastrulation is going to occur. At this area, what you're seeing here, this little orange layer is this orange layer here. This little gray layer is this gray layer here. So this is the blastodisc. This is where you have your 3 germ layers, the mesoderm, in between, endoderm, and ectoderm. So this is showing you where all of our structures come from. Things like our integumentary system, our epidermis, hair follicles, nails, etc. are all coming from that ectoderm. Skeletal system, muscular system is all coming from our mesoderm. Digestive system, urinary system is all our endoderm. So this is just giving you the embryonic origins. The gestational trophoblastic neoplasia is a condition that occurs in about less than 1%, 0.1% of all pregnancies. Is when that trophoblast behaves like a tumor. In 20% of those cases, the cells will metastasize to other tissues and become fatal. And typically the trophoblast should become an extra-embryonic membrane, but sometimes it invades other tissues. So it's tissues behaving badly. You can pause the video here, go back and review this section. Let's talk about those 4 extra-embryonic membranes. The germ layers that are part of this membrane formation include the yolk sac, which are the endoderm and mesoderm, the amnion, which is the ectoderm and mesoderm, the allantois, which is the endoderm and mesoderm, and the chorion, which is the mesoderm and trophoblast. These membranes support the early embryological and fetal development. So this yolk sac begins as a layer of cells around the outer edges of the blastocele. It's visible for about 10 days after fertilization. The vascular network of the yolk sac is the site of blood cell formation. It collects and distributes nutrients absorbed from the blastocele. The amnion begins as superficial cells that migrate around the amniotic cavity, and it's a combination of mesodermal and ectodermal cells. The amniotic fluid and amniotic cavity surrounds and cushions the developing embryo or fetus. Here you see what I mean. This is the yolk sac, and eventually this blastocele grows up and around, and that yolk sac becomes much, much smaller. The amniotic fluid is in here, and this area right here is where all the magic is going to happen. These little strips of cells right in there. So the allantois begins as an outpocketing of endoderm near the base of that yolk sac. It has free endodermal tip that grows towards the wall of the blastocyst and surrounds the mesodermal cells. It expands partway up the umbilical stalk, and the base of the allantois is going to form the urinary bladder. The chorion is where the mesoderm associated with the allantois spreads. It combines to form, it's a combination rather of the mesoderm and trophoblast, and it's the beginning of the placenta. The placenta forms the fetal and maternal blood cells, or forms from fetal and maternal blood cells. The villi of the chorion invade the endometrium. It's the primary mechanism for support of the developing embryo, and it's the site of exchange of oxygen and nutrients and carbon dioxide and waste. So here you see the continuation of that, those dividing cells along that primitive streak, along that blastocele line. The yolk sac is developing there, and you can see this embryo is continuing to kind of wrap around that yolk sac. The chorion is invading the endometrial lining. The cystocele trophoblast is still surrounding and supporting the whole structure. And here, this is again at about week 3. Again, typically a woman doesn't even know she's pregnant. She hasn't even missed a period yet, and this is going on. Week 5, she's missed a period. She might be late. She might be starting to make excuses. Here, look how small that yolk sac is at this point. Very, very small at week 5. And look how big the embryo is at this point. That's that little line that just started as that disc that has now started to differentiate and grow. Notice this mucus plug starts to develop at the end of the uterus. This is to prevent bacteria or sperm or anything else from coming in and affecting this development. You can pause the video here, go back and review. Let's talk about the placental blood supply. There are umbilical arteries which carry the blood from the developing fetus to the placenta. Arteries away. They're carrying it away from the placenta. The blood is deoxygenated, full of waste products. The placenta have the chorionic villi to provide surface area for gas exchange of nutrients and waste. The umbilical vein is carrying blood from the placenta back to the fetus. And here you see the villi, extensions for lots of blood supply, and the arteries and veins wrapping together in this umbilical cord area that's being developed. And this is basically the same structure, just broken down. There's hormones involved in maintaining the placenta. Human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG, it is present in blood and urine, which is our typical indicator of pregnancy. It maintains the corpus luteum and promotes the continued secretion of progesterone. Progesterone helps to maintain the uterine lining until the placenta is strong enough to do it itself. The corpus luteum persists for about 3 to 4 months before it declines in function. All of that elevated progesterone is why you experience that morning sickness during that first trimester. Makes you feel kind of icky. The human placental lactogen, HPL, is preparing the mammary glands for milk production. So women as early as 3 or 4 months pregnant can start noticing changes in their breast. Relaxin is a placental hormone that is released to increase the flexibility of the pubic symphysis to allow the pelvis to expand for delivery, also causes the dilation of the cervix and delays the onset of labor contractions until the late pregnancy. Progesterone and estrogen are, after the first trimester, progesterone from the placenta maintains the endometrial lining. Otherwise, it's from the corpus luteum. Estrogen production accelerates near the end of the 3rd trimester, stimulating labor and delivery. This is just a summary of what I just went over. You can pause the video here, go back and review this section. Let's talk about how organ systems are created. It's a process called organogenesis. The 2nd week of development, the central nervous system is forming. There's a deep groove in the ectodermal band along the posterior midline of the embryo, and by the 4th week of development, the heart is beating. Of course, it's not an actual heart like we know it, but the cells are starting to contract. So it's so cool. There's the heart, basics of neural tissue, eyes beginning to form. Crazy. Notice beginning of the arms, right? This backbone starting to form. It's crazy. This is 4 weeks. Woman doesn't even know she's pregnant, unless she was going for testing, right? During the 6th week of development, this is now the placenta has formed, embryo is floating in amniotic fluid, the limbs are longer, skull bones are starting to form around the brain, which hasn't fully formed yet. By the end of the 1st trimester, the human features are much better defined, the axial and appendicular muscles are starting to form, and fetal movements will begin. This is a human at 6 weeks. Crazy. 12 weeks. And at 4 months, the face and palate are formed, cerebral hemispheres are enlarging, hair follicles are present, hair is growing, peripheral nerves are forming. The 1st week first 8 weeks is the most rapid form of growth. By the end of the second trimester, the fetus is still very, very small, obviously, but has many, many defining features. It's just miniature. To the third trimester, the organ systems become ready for normal function. The rate of growth still begins to slow, and the largest weight gain is typically in the third trimester. This is an ultrasound of a 6-month-old fetus. You can see the outline right there. You can pause the video here, go back and review this section. Maternal changes with pregnancy. The mother has to absorb enough oxygen, nutrients, and vitamins for herself and the fetus. Must also eliminate all of those wastes. So the physical changes include weight gain, changes in balance since additional weight is not evenly distributed, and the maternal abdominal organs are pushed out of position, which can be very uncomfortable, right? Heartburn, constipation, all that fun stuff that goes with being pregnant. Increased respiratory rate and tidal volume, 50% increase in maternal blood volume, and increased hunger sensations, mostly because the baby's pushing up into your stomach, and so it's smaller, and so you can't eat as much, and so you're hungry all the time because you're not able to bring in all those nutrients that you need. Increased maternal glomerular filtration rate, so your kidneys are filtering like crazy. Increased urination. This is first because of increased urine production, but also because the uterus is pushing on the bladder. Mammary glands are developing. This is a series of hormone interactions like prolactin, estrogen, progesterone, growth hormone, thyroxine, etc. There's also changes in the uterus. It can contain up to 2 liters of fluid plus a fetus. So it can get huge. Number of uterine cells does not increase. It just grows larger because of the expanding smooth muscles. And this is just a summary of all of those changes. Let's talk about some risks of pregnancy. Pregnancy is a natural phenomenon. It's not, but it still has health risks, right? Demands of the maternal systems are dangerous sometimes. Pregnant women over 35 are twice as likely to die from pregnancy-related complications as from an automobile accident. You can pause the video here, go back and review. There are false and true labor. If you've ever been pregnant, maybe you had a false labor before. Stretching of the uterus can cause a gradual increase in spontaneous smooth muscle contraction within the myometrium. Progesterone from the placenta will inhibit contractions early in pregnancy, but false labor is still possible. False labor is spasms of the uterine wall that's not regular or persistent. True labor is a series of events that are not reversible. Once it starts, you're having a baby. Here's the whole process, onset of true labor. There's multiple things that go into play when your body is going into labor. Rising estrogen levels causing the increased sensitivity to oxytocin and relaxin, dilating the cervix. The release of oxytocin is going to stimulate smooth muscle contraction. Contraction of the myometrium distorts the uterus, which stimulates more oxytocin. It's a positive feedback loop. One's going to cause the other, is going to cause the other, is going to cause the other. They're encouraging each other. Oxytocin and contractions are just continually rolling around, being produced, meaning they're rolling out and occurring. So the goal of labor is parturition, right? This is the expulsion, the forcible expulsion of a fetus and placenta. That's kind of hard to, I don't know. I don't like how they said that. The forcible expulsion. It's divided into 3 stages: dilation, expulsion, placental stage. Dilation stage. This is the onset of true labor when the cervix dilates, when the fetus shifts towards the cervical canal due to gravity, uterine contractions, 8 or more hours. Contractions begin lasting up to 30 seconds and occur every 10 to 30 minutes, and then the frequency and durations increase, and eventually the water breaks, the amnion ruptures. The expulsion stage begins when the cervix completes its dilation. The contractions are at their maximum intensity. It continues until the fetus has emerged. It usually lasts less than 2 hours. Goodness, I hope. And the arrival of the newborn outside the mother's body is called delivery. Then you have the placenta to get rid of. Now, this is when the uterine contractions continue. The size of the uterus recoils, goes back slowly. The contractions can tear connections between the endometrium and placenta, and it's called the afterbirth that's ejected. The continual contractions after the placenta is ejected will compress the uterine blood vessels and restrict any blood loss. If you've ever had a baby, you know that you can continue losing blood for weeks after delivery. Premature labor can occur also. This is when true labor begins before the fetus has completed its normal development. Chances of a newborn surviving are directly related to body weight at delivery. Less than 400 grams, not a very high chance of survival. Respiratory, cardiovascular, urinary systems are unable to support life at that time. Less than 600 grams will not likely survive, but may, depending on the interventions that go about. Premature delivery, birth at 28 to 36 weeks, weight over a kilogram, with care, good chance of surviving and developing normally. You can pause the video here. I think I'm actually going to stop the video here so that I can go pick my daughter up from her preschool. And so this chapter will be divided into 2 little mini lectures, which may or may not be better for you. But let me know what questions you have on this section, and have a good day.